The sun hung low over Dry Creek like a judge's gavel suspended in mid-fall, casting the kind of golden light that made everything look either beautiful or damned, depending on what a man carried in his heart. James Cutler carried plenty. He rode into town on a mare the color of prairie dust, his shadow stretching long behind him like all the miles he'd traveled trying to outrun what he'd done. The war had ended 3 years prior, but some men wore it still, in the slump of their shoulders, in the way their eyes never quite settled on anything for long, always scanning for threats that existed only in memory. The townspeople watched him pass with that particular silence reserved for strangers who looked like they might be trouble or might prevent it. Hard to say which. His clothes were trail-worn but clean. His face weathered but younger than the lines suggested. 28, maybe 30. Old enough to have seen things. Young enough that they still haunted him. He dismounted outside the general store, tied his horse with hands that moved with practiced efficiency, and paused. From his saddlebag, he withdrew a gun belt, twin Colt .45s in holsters that had seen considerable use. The leather was dark with sweat and time, the metal showing the dull patina of countless draws. Martha Brennan was sweeping the boardwalk when she saw him holding those guns like they weighed more than iron should weigh. "Those for sale?" she asked, her voice carrying the particular directness of a woman who'd learned that subtlety was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford. Cutler looked at her, really looked, and Martha felt something shift in the air between them. His eyes were the gray of storm clouds before the rain, filled with a weariness that went deeper than flesh. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "These are for burying." She stopped sweeping. He walked past her, past the livery and the saloon, past the white-painted church where Reverend Michaels was preparing Sunday's sermon, out to the edge of town where the desert began its patient reclamation of all human ambition. There, beneath a twisted Joshua tree that looked like it was reaching toward heaven or warning it away, James Cutler dug. The earth was hard and unforgiving, same as everything else in this country. He dug until his hands blistered, until the sun touched the horizon and set the western sky ablaze in colors that reminded him of muzzle flash and burning towns. He dug until the hole was deep enough that no rain would ever wash it out, no coyote would ever scratch it open. Then he knelt there in the copper light of dusk, those guns laid out before him like an offering or a confession, and he spoke to them, or to God, or to the men he'd killed, or maybe to the man he used to be. "I'm done," he whispered. "I'm done." He placed them in the earth gently, almost reverently, then covered them over. When he was finished, there was nothing to mark the spot but disturbed ground and his own memory. He stood there as darkness gathered, feeling lighter and emptier all at once, and walked back toward town a different man than the one who'd ridden in. He didn't notice the 3 sets of eyes watching from the rocks above, didn't see the way they marked the spot, calculated the value, made their plans. Some men, they see a burial and think ending. Others see opportunity. 2 weeks passed like water over stone, slow but transformative. James took work at the livery, mucking stalls and shoeing horses, labor that left him tired enough to sleep without dreaming. He took meals at the boarding house where Martha served supper to traveling salesmen and ranch hands, and slowly, so slowly he didn't notice it happening, the weight he'd carried began to lift. He learned the rhythms of Dry Creek, learned that old man Henderson at the general store had lost 2 sons at Chancellorsville, learned that Reverend Michaels never asked about a man's past, only his intentions for the future. Learned that Martha Brennan was a widow who'd buried her husband and her illusions about frontier life in the same hard year, but kept her heart soft anyway through sheer force of will. "You settling here?" she asked him one evening as he lingered over coffee, the boarding house empty except for them and the lamplight. "Trying to," he answered honestly. Feels like trying to learn a language I used to speak. Peace? Normal. She smiled, sad and knowing. Normal's just a word for when you forget you're surviving. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw someone who understood, who'd walked through fire and come out the other side scarred but not broken. Beautiful in the way that earned things are beautiful. Hard-won, genuine, real. Miss Brennan. Martha. Martha, would you allow me to call on you, proper-like? Her smile changed, became something warmer. I'd like that, Mr. Cutler. James. I'd like that, James. That same night, 3 men rode into Dry Creek. They called themselves the Tate brothers, though only 2 of them were kin, Micah and Cyrus, lean and mean as starved dogs. The third was a half-breed tracker named Cole, who read sign like scripture and had even less mercy. They took rooms at the saloon, drank whiskey that didn't touch whatever thirst they carried, and asked careful questions about the stranger who'd ridden in a fortnight back. The one with the gun belt, the one who'd walked out to the edge of town and come back without it. Heard those were custom pieces, Micah said to the bartender, his voice casual as a snake in tall grass. Pearl handles, silver inlay. Heard they belonged to Jack Cutler. The bartender, a wise man who'd survived the frontier by knowing when to hear and when to forget, just shrugged. Heard a lot of things. Most of them ain't worth repeating. But word travels in small towns like blood through water. By morning, half of Dry Creek knew the Tate brothers were there. By afternoon, they knew why. James was replacing a shoe on a chestnut gelding when Martha found him, her face pale under the afternoon sun. There are men asking about you, she said without preamble. About your guns. His hands stilled on the horse's hoof. Something cold and familiar slithered down his spine. That old alertness, that combat readiness he'd tried so hard to bury along with the Colts. What kind of men? The kind that used to be you. He set the hoof down gently, straightened, and for a moment Martha saw it. The soldier, the gunfighter, the dangerous man beneath the gentle exterior he'd been building like a house over ruins. They'll dig them up, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Or try to make you. He was silent for a long moment, and Martha watched him war with himself. The man he'd been against the man he was trying to become, fought in the gray of his eyes like weather fronts colliding. I won't kill again, he said finally. I won't. Then what will you do? I don't know. But even as he said it, he heard the sound. Shovels biting earth out past the edge of town, beneath the Joshua tree. They'd found the spot. They were digging. James walked to the livery door and looked toward the desert. 3 figures dark against the late sun, excavating his past like archaeologists of violence. Around him, Dry Creek held its breath. Martha touched his arm. You don't have to be what you were to protect what you're becoming. He looked at her, and in her eyes he saw what he'd been searching for since the war ended. Belief. Not in his past, but in his possibility. No, he agreed softly, but I have to stop them. Then we all do. He turned to find Reverend Michaels standing there, Old Man Henderson beside him, the blacksmith named Garrett, the school teacher Miss Adams. Others emerging from doorways, from the general store, from the saloon, the town, gathering. This is my burden, James started. Was, Henderson interrupted, his voice gravelly with age and conviction. Was your burden. Now it's just men threatening our town, our peace. That makes it our concern. We don't need guns to stand against guns, Reverend Michaels added. We just need to stand. James felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed tight since the last battle, the last death, the last time he'd believed in anything beyond survival. They'll use those weapons against you, he warned. Against all of us. Martha squeezed his arm. Then you'll have to outsmart them without becoming them. The sun was setting as they walked together toward the edge of town. James and Martha, the reverend and the shopkeeper, the blacksmith and the teacher. Behind them came more, the saloon owner, the seamstress, ranch hands and farmers, old soldiers and young dreamers. Dry Creek turning out not in violence but in presence, in witness, in stubborn human refusal to let darkness dictate terms. By the time they reached the Joshua Tree, the Tate brothers had unearthed the gun belt. Micah held up one of the Colts, turned it in the dying light so the metal caught fire. "Hell of a piece," he called out when he saw the crowd approaching. "Hell of a thing to leave rotting in the ground." James stopped 20 yards away, the townspeople spreading out beside him in a line that was part defensive, part defiant. He stood there unarmed, vulnerable, terrified, and held his ground. "Those guns are buried," he said, his voice steady. "They stay that way." Cyrus laughed, ugly and sharp. "You planning to stop us, Cutler? You in this town of shopkeepers and scripture quoters?" "If necessary." Cole, the tracker, studied the crowd with eyes that had seen every kind of human desperation. "Lots of witnesses," he observed quietly. "Lots of people to remember who pulled a trigger and why." Micah's smile faltered. "That's supposed to scare us?" "No," James said, "but it should make you think. You kill me, you kill any of these people, you're not outlaws hiding in the territories. You're murderers with a town full of witnesses who'll see you hang. We'll be long gone before... Will you?" It was Martha who spoke, stepping forward. "You think you can outrun every telegraph in 3 states? Every lawman who'll hear about the men who gunned down unarmed townspeople in broad daylight?" She gestured to the crowd. "We'll make you famous. We'll make you hunted. We'll make sure you never stop looking over your shoulder until the rope finds your neck." Silence fell, broken only by the desert wind and the creak of gun leather. Micah looked at the Colts in his hand, at the crowd, at James standing there like a man who'd made peace with whatever came next. The mathematics of violence shifted, tipped, balanced on a knife's edge. "They're just guns," Reverend Michaels said into the quiet. "Just metal and wood. Whatever power they have, we give them. Whatever happens here, we choose." He looked at the brothers. "Choose wisely." The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then Cole spoke, so quiet only his companions heard. "Not worth it." "What?" Micah turned on him. "I said it's not worth it. Not for guns we can't sell without bringing every law west of the Mississippi down on us. Not for the reputation of killing folk who won't fight back." He spat into the dirt. "There's easier money, cleaner." Cyrus shifted, uncertain. Micah stood there, fury and frustration warring across his face. Finally, he threw the Colt down. It hit the disturbed earth with a thud that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. "The hell with all of you!" he snarled. "Keep your buried guns and your righteous town. There's nothing here worth dying for anyway." They mounted their horses, rough, angry movements, and rode out as the sun touched the horizon. The townspeople watched them go in silence, holding their formation until the riders were dots against the copper sky. Then, and only then, did the line break. James knelt beside the disturbed earth where his guns lay exposed once more. He picked up the Colt Micah had thrown down, felt its familiar weight, its perfect balance. Around him, the townspeople waited. For a long moment he stood there holding it, and Martha saw him looking not at the weapon, but through it, into all the yesterdays it represented. "I could bury them again," he said to no one in particular. "Deeper this time." "Or," Old Man Henderson prompted, "or I could accept that some things don't stay buried. Not really." He turned, looked at the faces around him. These people who'd stood unarmed against armed men, who'd risked everything for his peace, for their collective future. "I thought putting these in the ground would make me someone new. Turns out I had it backwards." He walked to Reverend Michaels, held out the gun. "I need you to keep these. Lock them in the church, in the strongest box you have. Not buried, not hidden, kept, held, for emergencies, for protection, but not worn, not carried, not made into who I am." Michaels took the weapon carefully, like a poisonous snake that might still have bite. "You trust us with this?" "I trust us," James corrected. "This town, what we built here today." He retrieved the second Colt from the hole, brushed the dirt from it, handed it over. "What will keep building?" Martha stepped close as the Reverend walked away with the guns wrapped in his coat. The crowd began to disperse, heading back toward town, toward supper and lamplight and the ordinary miracles of peaceful evenings. "You stayed," she said. "So did you." "I live here." "So do I." He said it like a revelation, like a man discovering his own name. "I really do. Not the man with the guns, not the soldier, not the ghost, just James. Here. Now." She took his hand and her fingers were warm against his work-roughened palm. "That man," she said softly, "the one you're becoming, I think I'm falling in love with him." His throat tightened. "He's pretty fond of you, too." They walked back to town as night fell, not ahead of the darkness, not behind it, but with it, accepting it as part of the natural order. The stars emerged one by one, ancient and indifferent to human struggles, bearing witness anyway. At the boarding house, Martha paused on the porch. "Stay for supper? If you'll have me. Tonight, tomorrow, long as you're here." Inside, lamplight glowed golden through the windows. Voices drifted out, Henderson and Garrett arguing about the cost of good steel, Miss Adams laughing at something, the ordinary music of community. James stood there, Martha's hand in his, and felt something settle deep in his bones. Peace, maybe, or at least the foundation upon which peace could be built. "Miss Brennan," he said. "Martha." "Martha." He smiled, and it reached his eyes for the first time since the war. "I think I'm home." "You think?" "I know." She squeezed his hand and led him inside, into the warmth and light. Into the life he'd thought was buried with those guns, but which had been waiting here all along. Not in violence relinquished, but in connection embraced. Not in the past left behind, but in the present claimed, step by step, choice by choice, day by ordinary, extraordinary day. Behind them, out past the edge of town, the disturbed earth beneath the Joshua tree slowly settled. In time, the desert would smooth it over, would erase all evidence that anything had ever been buried there. But the guns themselves, locked in their box in the church basement, kept but not carried, remembered but not wielded, would remain. A reminder, not of who James Cutler had been, but of who he'd chosen to become, who they'd all chosen to become. This town that had dug up his past, not to revive it, but to face it down together, to prove that the future was always more powerful than history when people stood together in its defense. In the boarding house, Martha served supper. James sat at the table, surrounded by neighbors who'd become friends, friends who'd become family. He ate and laughed and lived, and outside the desert wind blew clean and cool, carrying away the dust of the day, making space for whatever tomorrow would bring. He'd buried his guns. The town had dug them back up, and in doing so, they'd all found something worth more than any weapon, any past, any ghost. They'd found each other. They'd found home. The end came quietly, as the best endings do. Not with gunshots, but with coffee cups refilled. Not with violence, but with the gentle sound of Martha's laugh. Not with burial or excavation, but with the simple act of living, of staying, of choosing every day to be present in the peace they'd fought for without firing a single shot. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, ancient and constant. Inside, James Cutler was finally, truly free.